Nobody cares about your life story. Let that land. Not because your story doesn't matter, not because your pain isn't real, not because the things that happened to you were acceptable, but because the world does not run on sympathy. It never has. And understanding that distinction is the beginning of everything. Everyone has a story. Every single person walking this earth carries something. Broken homes, broken promises. Poverty, trauma, betrayal, loss, addiction, abuse, neglect, shame. The kind of weight that doesn't show on the outside but never fully leaves the inside. These things are real. They are not small. They are not imagined. And no reasonable person would look at what some people have endured and tell them it was easy. But here's the uncomfortable truth that most people spend years running from. Your pain is not an exception. It is not unique, and it is not a currency that the world will accept in exchange for the life you want. The world is not a courtroom where you present your circumstances, and a judge decides you deserve better. It doesn't work that way. It never worked that way. The world is an open field, and what you build there is entirely up to you. Not because it's fair. Not because the starting positions are equal. But because the alternative of waiting for fairness, will consume the rest of your life while you stand completely still. There is a habit that keeps millions of people stuck, and it's one of the most invisible traps in human psychology, because it feels like progress. It's the habit of telling your story over and over, to new people, to old people, to anyone who will listen. The version of your past that explains why things are the way they are, why you haven't moved yet, why the situation is complicated, why the timing isn't right, why this specific thing happened to you specifically, and why it changed the course of everything. And the dangerous part is that talking about it feels like doing something. It releases tension, it gets you nodding heads, it gets you validation. And validation feels like progress, but it isn't, not even close. Talking about the problem is not the same as solving it. Explaining your position is not the same as changing it. And seeking understanding from others is not the same as understanding yourself. People repeat their story instead of rewriting it, and every time they repeat it, the story becomes more real, more permanent, more like a wall, and less like a door. Here is what nobody tells you about emotional processing. There is a version of it that heals, and there is a version of it that traps. One moves through the pain, the other lives inside it. And from the outside, they can look almost identical. Both involve talking, both involve feeling, both involve reflecting on what happened. But the difference is the direction they're moving. One asks, what happened to me and how do I move forward? The other asks, what happened to me and why does no one understand how hard it's been? One is processing, the other is performance. And there is no shame in having lived in performance for a while. Many people do. Life is hard. Sympathy feels like oxygen when you've been underwater. But at some point, the oxygen runs out. And you have to swim on your own. And nobody, absolutely nobody, can swim for you. Now let's talk about what the world actually responds to. Not what it should respond to. Not what would be fair. But what it does, in practice, respond to. Value, effort, results, consistency, reliability, skill, execution. That is it. That is the full list. It is short, it is uncomfortable, and it does not include your intentions, your backstory, your reasons, your feelings, or your explanation for why things aren't where you want them to be yet. A surgeon who lost a patient because their hands were trembling and their focus was elsewhere will not be excused because they had a difficult morning. A contractor who missed every deadline because life was complicated will not be hired again because the complications were genuine. A parent who was never present because they were working through their own unresolved pain will still have raised children who felt their absence, regardless of the reason. This is not cruelty, this is consequence. And consequences do not negotiate. The world operates this way not because people are heartless, but because results are the only universal language that everyone, in every culture, in every field, in every relationship can read clearly. Words are interpreted, intentions are invisible, but results speak without ambiguity. There are two people I want you to think about. The first person has been through real difficulty, significant difficulty, and they know it. They know exactly when it started. They know every moment that contributed to where they are. They can describe it with precision. They have explained it to their family, their friends, their colleagues, their therapists, their partners. And every time they explain it, they feel a brief release. And then the weight settles back down, because nothing has moved. And this happens year after year. The story gets more refined. The explanation gets more accurate. And life stays exactly the same. The second person has been through the same difficulty, perhaps even harder difficulty. But somewhere, at some point, something shifted in them. Not dramatically, not in a single moment of inspiration. Quietly, almost reluctantly, they made a decision that was less of a declaration and more of an exhale. They stopped explaining, not because they stopped hurting, but because they understood that the explanation was costing them time they didn't have. And they started building small things at first. Invisible things. Nobody noticed. Nobody clapped. There was no audience. Just the private, unglamorous, daily work of becoming someone different. Someone who acts instead of explains. Someone who builds instead of broadcasts. Someone whose results eventually make the story irrelevant. 10 years later, both people have a story, but only one of them has a life that changed. I want to talk about discipline now, because discipline is the most misunderstood concept in the space of self-improvement. Discipline is not punishment. It is not rigidity. It is not denying yourself everything you enjoy. It is not waking up at 4 and because someone online told you that's when warriors are born. Discipline is simpler and harder than all of that. Discipline is the gap between how you feel in the moment and what you know you need to do. That gap is where your character lives. Every time you close it, you become slightly more of the person you're trying to be. Every time you let the feeling win, you drift slightly further from it. And here is the part that nobody wants to hear. Discipline is built in silence, not in conversations about discipline. Not in posts about your commitment to change. Not in the announcement that this time is different. It is built in the private, witnessed by no one moments when you do the thing anyway. When you're tired, when it's inconvenient, when there's a better excuse available than there has ever been before. And you do it anyway. Quietly, without credit, without an audience. That is where the transformation actually lives. Not in the declaration, in the execution, over and over, without applause, without explanation. Let me speak to the tendency to over-explain, because this is subtle, and it deserves careful attention. Over-explaining is almost always rooted in one thing: the fear that people won't understand, that they'll judge you without having the full picture. That they'll hold you accountable for outcomes without accounting for conditions. And that fear is completely human. It makes sense. Most of us have experienced judgment that felt unfair. Most of us have been misread by someone who didn't take the time to understand. But here is what over-explaining actually communicates to the people who matter most. It communicates that you don't fully trust your own actions to speak for you. It communicates that you need external validation to feel secure in your choices. It communicates that you are still more focused on how you are perceived than on what you are producing. Confident people don't over-explain. Not because they don't have reasons. They always have reasons. but because they trust that the work will make the reasons irrelevant. They understand that clarity comes from consistency, not from commentary. They have trained themselves to let their output be the argument. And that quiet confidence is one of the most compelling things a human being can project. Stop explaining yourself to people who haven't asked. Stop justifying your decisions before anyone has questioned them. Stop preemptively defending your choices with your history. Make the decision. Do the work. Let the result be the sentence. Accountability. This is the word that most people understand and almost nobody practices at the deepest level. Because surface level accountability is easy. It says, I made a mistake. I take responsibility. I'll do better. And that's fine. That's the beginning. But deep accountability is something much more uncomfortable. Deep accountability says, regardless of what happened to me, regardless of what was done to me, regardless of how unfair the circumstances were, I am the one who determines what happens next. Not partially, entirely. That feels unjust, because in many cases it is unjust. The conditions that created your situation were not always your fault. The people who hurt you were wrong to do so. The system that failed you was genuinely broken, and none of that is in question. But you are not being asked to say that it was your fault. You are being asked to say it is my responsibility, and those two things are completely different. Fault looks backward. Responsibility looks forward. And you cannot move forward while you are standing still looking backward. At some point, the view behind you has to become less important than the road ahead, not because the past doesn't matter, but because the past is finished. The only thing that is still in motion is right now, and what you do with right now is entirely yours. Emotional control. I want to be precise about what this means because it is frequently mistaken for emotional suppression. They are not the same thing. Suppression buries the emotion. It tells you, don't feel that. It pushes the feeling underground where it builds pressure and eventually, inevitably finds a way out in forms you didn't choose and moments you didn't plan for. Because your results will do the telling. Not loudly, not dramatically, but with a clarity that no explanation ever achieves. Results are self-evident. They don't require context. They don't require defense. They exist in the world as fact, and facts are undeniable even to the people who wanted to dismiss you. So stop waiting for understanding. Stop waiting for permission. Stop waiting for the moment when your circumstances finally align in a way that feels fair enough to begin. That moment is not coming. And the person waiting for it is losing ground every single day to the person who decided to begin without it. You are not your history. You are not your trauma. You are not the worst thing that was done to you or the most painful moment you lived through. You are what you do next. You are what you do tomorrow morning before anyone is watching. You are the private commitment that never makes it onto a social media post, but shows up every day in the quality of your effort. Build quietly. Execute relentlessly. Let the work answer every question that was ever asked about you. Nobody cares about your life story. Give them results they cannot ignore instead. Comment. Results over excuses.